So our next speaker is Eeva Latosuo. Eeva is a PhD student at the Snow and Avalanche Research Program at Simon Fraser University and an associate professor of outdoor studies at Alaska Pacific University. In her free time, she appreciates strong coffee and time outside. I know all of us can appreciate that as well. Please welcome Eeva.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, hello everybody. I like coming back to this event because it's one of the only places where the queue for the men's bathroom is longer than for women. And I hope that you are seeing me as a female researcher here on the stage. And I love seeing all the women there in the crowd, though. So welcome, everybody. And this is a collaborative project about users' awareness and response to uncertainty information in public avalanche forecasts. As avalanche professionals, we often face days with uncertainty when traveling in the backcountry. And each day has different amounts of unknowns that we have to put into our decision-making equation. And some days, honestly, have more question marks than clear answers. Understanding and accommodating uncertainty is a critical piece of professional and personal risk management in the avalanche terrain. While this is a common dilemma, there is no consistent way that uncertainty is communicated between the forecasters or to the public that reads the avalanche bulletin. The way information is collected, processed, and shared can introduce uncertainty in different ways. Let's look how this plays out in the avalanche forecast. Top information product is danger rating. We already heard about that. By default, some danger ratings have a larger uncertainty range built in. We definitely feel more assured about low than about moderate danger rating. And avalanche problems are another way to describe the complexity of the hazard. Persistent slab, perhaps, has more unknowns than a storm slab, but I got to look back to Carl. Maybe it's not the case. And in the common forecasting process, forecaster will then consider the timing of the hazard, location of the hazard, and how likely and large they might be triggered. And these choices are based on quantity and quality of data or observations. And all of these introduce uncertainty into the assessment, yet describing it is missing it from the forecasting products. From my point of view, one of the ultimate questions is, how does the avalanche forecast support the recreationist decision-making under uncertainty? And the goal of our project is to define how uncertainty information could be included in the public avalanche forecast as relevant information for the forecast users and a feasible communication tool for the forecasters themselves. So, to learn how added uncertainty information would be perceived by forecast users, we used an online survey. In the core of the survey, participants read hypothetical, yet realistic forecast scenarios, and then answered questions about uncertainty in those specific situations. Each participant pondered 4 different scenarios. And one of those did not have any additional uncertainty information, like this baseline forecast example. And after each scenario, we asked the participants how much uncertainty they estimated to be in the forecast on scale 0 to 100. We asked them, would they travel in the backcountry under these conditions? Yes or no? And we asked them, how useful was this forecast for their decision-making on scale 0 to 100. And while baseline scenarios did not have any additions about uncertainty, the 60 experimental scenarios presented information about different sources of uncertainty using both high and low uncertainty options. In this example scenario, we added a sentence about high uncertainty around timing of the hazard, a sentence about high uncertainty about the location of the hazard, and information about the low uncertainty related to the quality of available observations. And some scenarios included very explicit uncertainty statements, like a sentence about the overall extent of uncertainty in that described condition, and a sentence on what can reader do to deal with the amount of uncertainty. And based on the experimental design, these statements were either included or excluded in the scenario that they might have gotten in their random order. And besides the scenario questions, we had a plethora of other things. And I'm going to give you results also on a question about the difficulty of understanding the information on scale 0 to 100. And in addition, a question how adding uncertainty information impacted the participants' trust in the Avalanche Center. So I will share results today using responses from 1,300 plus participants who assessed over 5,200 avalanche forecasts that represented 68 different combinations. And in this analysis that I'm telling you today, we are using the sample as a whole, and all the results are statistically significant. And if you want to read more details about how we did that, I'm going to give you a QR code to our paper in the end. But let's talk a little more about sample, because we are in Colorado, and we recruited the participant with a very extensive outreach by Colorado Avalanche Information Center and the Friends Group. So many of the participants in this sample are actually from the CAIC snow pool. And I'm very thankful for all the people who have signed up for that. It's a great way to have direct communication with the people who are using the forecast and the center. The invitation to participate went also out to the National Avalanche Center network of US Avalanche forecast centers and Avalanche Canada, but clear majority of the participants use CAIC as their primary center. And the rest are coming from a very diverse pool of other centers. And the sample seems representative of the typical backcountry recreationist pool. 75% of them are male. 80% of them do backcountry skiing or riding as their primary activity, and their common ages are between 25 to 45 years old. Other things of interest included general education level, and our participants are very highly educated. And the survey design is text-based, so we kind of wanted to know if how the people would read them. And this graph here really fares well for any forecast use, since avalanche forecast language is technical, and it's categorized as intermediate or advanced language in general. The participants have many years of experience in the backcountry travel. Only 8% of them had less than 3 years doing the activity. Of these, 10% have been personally involved in an avalanche. And they're committed travelers, most going out 21 to 50 days a year. 64% of them prefer variable avalanche terrain, but 10% tries to keep very low exposure to the terrain. And most participants have had formal avalanche education. 44% of them have at least level 1. And this is great because often the public avalanche forecast messages are written to the individuals that have at least an introductory avalanche course. Okay, moving on to the results. And I'm going to start off with just a statement about our participants' general understanding about uncertainty. So we also inquired them with true and false questions about different types of uncertainties in specifically avalanche forecast setting. And people did really well. The top points were 12 points, and the mean score was 8.8. So what this means that the people know that there is uncertainty in avalanche forecast. So it's intuitive for us. So now into the first result. When the forecast text had direct statements about uncertainty sources and magnitude, the participants' awareness of uncertainty increased significantly. So this means that the simple act of talking about it in the forecast helped the participant to become more aware of this quality of the day's avalanche environment. Second, we learned that when participants assessed the uncertainty as high, they made more conservative choices about entering avalanche terrain. This shows that including the information impacts the actions in right direction. The audience picked up the message to widen the safety margin when this was suggested. Next important insight is that the higher the participant assessed the uncertainty in the conditions, the less useful the forecast was for their personal decision-making. It does make sense. Avalanche forecast products, they have their limitation, and we know it's just a starting point. It is also important to note that including uncertainty information did not make the forecast text more difficult to understand. So the takeaway here is that users will need support and guidance on accommodating uncertainty. Avalanche warning services and avalanche education providers are in key positions to establish common vocabulary for communicating uncertainty and to share practical suggestions for how to deal with it in the field. Last but not least, adding uncertainty information increased our participants' trust in the Avalanche Center as a reliable source of information. So forecasters can be more open and transparent about the limitations of their knowledge and still be considered trustworthy experts. So our work has two major implications. Including uncertainty information in the public avalanche forecast has clear benefits with no real drawbacks. It can improve user awareness of uncertainties, lead to more cautious decision-making, and enhance trust in the Avalanche Center. And guidance on using uncertainty information effectively in avalanche forecasts is crucial. We cannot just slap uncertainty statement in it and hope that people will make the right conclusions. So avalanche centers and avalanche educators are truly in key support roles to improve uncertainty awareness and management. In the future phase of this project, we will develop effective uncertainty communication to include in the public forecast through a collaborative design process that includes both forecasters and the forecast users in the design team. And so you can read more about our research in this extended abstract from ISSW 2024. We just got back from there. And I want to recognize project partners, Simon Fraser University's Snow and Avalanche Research Program, Colorado Avalanche Information Center, and the National Science Foundation National Center for Atmospheric Research. And my sincere thanks to all the participants for the survey. It was like a mean time for people to complete it was 20 minutes. So thank you so much for all that valuable time. And we're also grateful to the Coast Salish peoples on whose traditional and unceded territories Simon Fraser University and our research program resides. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Eeva. It's a great talk. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. Anyone have a burning question for Eeva?
Where's Ron?
Okay, we'll get the microphone to Ron.
No, just... What?
Maybe Ron should carry the microphones.
Thanks, Eeva. We have, our focus has some sort of mismatch problem because we focus for a large area, and in the end of the day, when you go skiing, the slope scale is where rubber meets the road. So it's kind of built in. The question is if you actually address it in a way of, did you notice any difference if you addressed it in a way of terrain decision or the kind of statement where we put usually when after a big storm, a few days after that avalanches are harder to trigger, but if you will trigger, it's probably going to be big. That's kind of statement of uncertainty. Are those part of the statement you guys looked into, or?
Okay, that's a really good question. So we asked the participants to think about typical trip that they would do, and we asked them to kind of maybe think about like low exposure or moderate exposure or high exposure for avalanche terrain. So we kind of tried to stay a little bit away from actual slope scale decision because that's going to be very hard to do in an online survey, for example. But we tried to see a little bit of how people would see themselves working the terrain. But you're pointing out to this really crucial understanding of avalanche forecasters want to do really accurate forecasting, but their scale is regional scale. And you are trying to make decisions for that when you're creating forecast. So you will have this large scale geographical, geospatial uncertainties related to the scale. Meanwhile, the person who is going out and reading your forecast, they most likely are thinking about specific place where they want to go, and they will be using their own decision-making process to come up with the slope scale decisions, and their uncertainties have to do with that. So, yeah, I don't have an answer to that question, but I think that's one of those places where our better understanding and awareness of uncertainties and the different scales of those would be very important. No answers yet, but maybe down the road.
Thanks so much, Eeva. This kind of seems to be, I'm thinking about some takeaways for recreational avalanche education. Oftentimes uncertainty seems to be a concept that's relegated to higher level, level 2 courses and things like that. And this really suggests to me that we ought to be introducing this concept of uncertainty perhaps earlier than we've been in the past. Maybe, I don't want to use a gatekeep, but it's like, oh, that's a more advanced concept, but we might actually need to be talking about uncertainty from the get-go is maybe some of the takeaways I'm getting from this. Yeah,
well, it's my topic of focus, so I'd say you should be talking about uncertainty every day with all the people. But I realize it's a trade-off between all the things you need to teach for your students in the first interaction. So I don't have the right, quite the way of where do you prioritize, all those things. But it should be introduced in trip planning, as well as when you're communicating with your group and partners. People should have vocabulary for that I'm not sure if forecasters say that we are not sure about the timing of the storm, that should be discussed on the courses and helping your students to understand what that actually means. Is that an answer to your question? Yeah.
So it's never too early to talk to people about critical thinking.
No. And like I said, uncertainty is everywhere. We just went through a pandemic. We're dealing with climate change all the time. So it's not like your students might be students of avalanche awareness, but they operate in this uncertain world all the time. So it's just like connecting the dots.
Great. Thanks, Eeva.
Thanks.